Hello and welcome to another edition of Tipping Point, New Mexico. My name is Paul Gessing. I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation. You can find out about the Rio Grande Foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I'm pleased this week to be joined by David Holt. He is the president of the Consumer Energy Alliance, and he joins us from Houston, Texas. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and Consumer Energy Alliance, well, obviously you get energy, and that's a major part of New Mexico's economy. But talk a little bit about your organization, the Consumer Energy Alliance, and who it is and where you guys kind of come from philosophically.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Consumer Energy Alliance we're almost 15 years old now, which is kind of hard to believe. And the premise was energy impacts the entire U.S. economy. So how do we bring the entire U.S. economy together under one kind of trade association umbrella to have these discussions about where energy comes from, what it means to individuals, what it means to families, what it means to small businesses all across the country, how we keep those supply chains and value chains going with energy. And we bring everyone together in a dialogue to talk about affordable energy, reliable energy, U.S. energy security, environmental stewardship. It's kind of that all the above approach to meeting our energy needs, meeting our energy challenges, but really looks at it from the end user, the consumer, that household, that small business, what the implications are for them. So today, 15 years later, we have about 300 different businesses, corporations, entities that are members of CEA that really run the gamut across the U.S. economy, from manufacturing to small businesses to the farming community to little local chambers of commerce all over the country, to the airline industry, to the trucking industry, to organized labor, to individual families, and then the entire energy supply chain: oil, gas, wind, solar, hydro, nuclear, are all represented by CEA. So it's really getting together to kind of talk about where energy is coming from, what it means to individuals, and how we can all come together to make sensible energy policy discussions for the United States that ensure low costs and reliable energy.
Now, we're going to talk a lot about the current virus-driven economic devastation, and it just sounds like every one of your members has probably been hit significantly because they are such a broad swath of the U.S. economy. But it sounds like you must do a lot of herding of cats, because the renewable folks and nuclear and oil and gas, they're probably either at odds or at least not moving in the same direction quite often.
That's another great question, and surprisingly, in our organization, there's not been a lot of disconnect. The United States now is the number one oil producer in the world, the number one natural gas producer in the world, but we're also number two in wind, number two in solar, and we're number one in environmental stewardship. So there's a great energy story to tell. But when you look at supply chains and you look at what oil and natural gas mean for creating and manufacturing things like, let's look at the COVID response, hand sanitizers, face masks, personal protection equipment. All those things are made with either oil or natural gas. So continuing the expansion and the trajectory of the oil and natural gas fossil fuel industry, while we continue to increase demand, and ultimately the country is going to get back on its feet again, and we are going to start consuming energy again in a robust manner, we do see demand increases over time, where we'll need more oil, we'll need more natural gas, we'll need more wind, we'll need more solar, we'll need more energy conservation, and in my view, we'll need more nuclear as well, and we need to continue to have all those conversations.
No doubt about it. And while New Mexico and your presence in New Mexico is undoubtedly driven by the oil and gas industries, nuclear is a big part of New Mexico's heritage, both the military side as well as mining for uranium. And it's certainly an industry that it would be good, I think, potentially a great boon for our economy and a part of our state that right now is much more impoverished than the area where you all probably do majority of your business in the Southeast and the Permian Basin. But uh, talk about your presence in New Mexico and your presence across the country. Certainly, the Permian Basin is a great oil and gas producing area of our state and our country. And any information you want to share about those folks down there, and kind of how they've been impacted here, because it's a double whammy. It's a supply and a demand shock in with regards to that kind of energy production.
Yeah. And in New Mexico, we've had a presence in New Mexico for a number of years, primarily focused on exactly what you said, connecting what the Permian and oil and natural gas means for the state of New Mexico and for the rest of the nation to other small businesses, local chambers, elected officials throughout the state, all those kind of folks, to make sure that we're on the same page in understanding what energy means to the state of New Mexico. And it's fundamental to the state of New Mexico, with 35% of state revenues derived from oil and natural gas. Obviously, that's in a precarious situation right now, but long term, that's a great industry, great growth industry, great way to attract other supply chain industries to the state to create long-term sustainable jobs in manufacturing, in supply chain driven onshoring of supply chain driven aspects of the U.S. economy that clearly, in the conversation between the United States and China, and what China knew when it knew it, and our reliance as a nation on kind of critical supply chain industries on China. And is there going to be an effort to kind of onshore those industries back to the United States? I think because of the Permian and because of the job needs for the state of New Mexico, it's going to create a really good conversation to have, particularly for New Mexico, about trying to onshore those jobs, not only just to the United States, but to New Mexico in particular. And, largely you have about 3 counties in the state that are driving a lot of the discussion from an environmental standpoint, and the other 30 counties around the state are looking to create jobs, looking to create infrastructure and manufacturing and supply chain economics. And we've got to have that conversation, because the United States, one of the great untold stories in the United States today, is our environmental leadership. And the fact that even while we are producing more oil and natural gas than we ever have in our history, and again, we're number one in oil and number one in natural gas in the world, our emissions across the board are also down to historic levels. So we're able to do both these things at the same time, while we're also growing wind and solar and energy conservation, energy efficiency. So it's a great story to tell. It's a testament to the state of New Mexico and the leadership of industry and governments. But there's more to do, and we believe that energy, and particularly oil and natural gas, is going to be a great driver to getting this economy going again.
All right. Well, there's a lot of issues to discuss. I definitely want to talk supply chain in a second, as well as the environment. But you started out with an assumption there about the U.S. economy and energy consumption kind of getting back to some semblance of normal. I hate to kind of put you on the spot and say I disagree, but obviously we've got a political situation, and agree or disagree, there's a lot of new changes that are going to be happening as a result of this virus. But a lot of people aren't going to be so excited to get on airplanes, cruise ships, just a wide variety of forms of energy consumption aren't going to be happening. And that's setting aside the very real just economic impact in terms of jobs and livelihoods lost and all those kinds of things. So, you probably talk to a lot of smart people, economists and whatnot, CEOs of these businesses. What are you hearing from those folks? Feel free to name drop if you care to.
Without name dropping, and you're right. It's maybe I was a little bit too optimistic in my initial answer. It's going to be a process, and eventually, you're seeing many states start to open, taking baby steps in that direction. I'm here in the state of Texas, in the Houston area, and restaurants and movie theaters and other small businesses opened last week to 25% capacity, and it's going to open more broadly in the next couple of weeks. So you're seeing some of that, and some of that return to the new normal, and we still need to define what that means. But you're also seeing in the Midwest some calls to open up manufacturing and some of those non-critical manufacturing opportunities and businesses. So there is a lot of pressure to get the economy going in some trajectory again. We saw that Secretary Mnuchin just yesterday said, listen, if we don't start opening up, we're going to do long-term damage to the U.S. economy. And I don't think anyone wants to see that. And you're seeing more and more.
Are you sure about that? I hate to, and this gets into conspiracy theory, but we have a president who is deeply unpopular in certain areas, blue states especially. Have you heard anybody credible talk about the idea that some of these folks are trying to put the skids on the economy until it's too late for the election? It just seems so. And I know that this is getting black helicoptery, but the way these people have such strong emotions and TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, there seems to be an almost desire among some of these folks to because Trump had the economy. The economy was his thing. For all the tweets and all the things that he sometimes said and did that frustrated people, including his supporters, the economy was such a go-to, and it just seems like it all got pulled away so quickly and in such an unprecedented fashion that we've never shut in an entire population of healthy people to deal with one of these kinds of crises before. So I know feel free to dance around that one as much as you want to.
Well, listen, we can put on our tinfoil hats a little bit if we need to. It's interesting if you look back and you say, okay, let's not. I don't want to believe that a faction of this country wants to shut in this country to win an election. I don't want to believe that. But if you look at the evidence and you look at how the goalposts have moved over the last, say, 30 days or so, and a lot has happened in the last 30 days, but it was, hey, we've got to flatten the curve. That was the narrative. Let's flatten the curve. We don't want to overwhelm the hospitals. That was the reason that everyone was kept home to begin with, and we were all social distancing at the outset. Flatten the curve, make sure that we get that model going on the downward trajectory. Well, you're seeing that in the vast majority of the nation now. And now the narrative is we can't really return to normal because there's not enough testing that's available. And what are we going to do when we break down the kind of social distancing? How are we going to test? So you're seeing some conversations now about overwhelming amount of testing, temperature checks. There's going to be some things that we're going to have to do as a society that let us kind of come back to a certain whatever the new normal looks like. But waiting for a cure to the virus, which could take several years, waiting for the ability to test every man, woman, and child in the United States, which could also take several years. That kind of moving the goalpost where it's universal testing and universal virus protection. I don't think we are in a situation as an economy where we can afford to do that. We also know, Paul, a lot more about who is impacted by the virus and who is slightly more safe, in terms of kind of not getting a critical version of the virus. So if you're over 70, if you have pre-existing conditions, things like that, you're more susceptible and you probably need to social distance yourself for a longer period of time. But for the young in America, younger than I am, getting back to some semblance of normal, probably is getting to the point where it's making a lot of sense, and we've got to get this economy going. And you're exactly right, whether you're a Trump supporter or not, the economy under this president and some of the business decisions made under this president have done a lot of benefit to the majority of America.
Yeah, and sorry to put you on the spot there, but I think Wally and I were talking before the show, and there was an op-ed in the Journal on Saturday. Ollie described himself as a doctor. You know, doctors have opinions about this thing like everybody else, and of course, we're up for a reevaluation as a state. Our governor on May the 15th, she may continue to open the economy or she may dial it back. It just depends. But this doctor was saying we need to go to at least June the 15th, with the current stay-at-home order. And you actually answered the question much more directly than I could have hoped for. I appreciate you're not dancing around it so much. So thank you for that. But it really does seem like we're in some states. My wife, she works for a steel case dealer, and Michigan's one of those states that's been really locked down, and she can't get product to sell. So, these kinds of things, it's not a matter of, I guess what I'm getting at, turning a switch on and off. You have multiple factors throughout the economy. And if there's just one little kink in that supply line, this is where we're going to turn to that supply chain, the whole system goes cattywampus. So in the supply chain area, obviously there's been a lot of talk about China. Your organization, it sounds like, being so energy focused, a long supply chain is not necessarily a bad thing for you guys. But can you talk about, before we dive into the whole supply chain issue, kind of what your vision of the supply chain is and how it affects your members? Is it one way or the other? Are you preparing for onshoring, hoping for onshoring, hoping we abandon China largely? What's kind of your status on that?
And let me say one more thing about the coronavirus. We're seeing more tests. So you're seeing more positive tests. That is also being underreported by the media. The more folks that we are testing, and you get these asymptomatic that have no symptoms, and you're testing them and you're finding that they actually had the virus. So you're seeing an increase in the total number of positive tests, even while the mortality rates are starting to, that curve is definitely going down in almost all the states. So that's something that I think the media needs to do a better job of conveying that to folks, saying, the more tests we do, the more folks we're going to find that had or have the virus, and the more we can do to kind of mitigate against that. So I think that is a positive.
If you're going to deviate away from the supply chain, I'm going to follow you right down there.
No. Let me answer your question.
No, you
I wanted to make that point. Let me answer your question.
Right. So no. I want to jump in. But statistics are something that's under-taught in our school system, and it's something that, as a nation, we need to reevaluate our mathematics curriculum with greater emphasis on statistics, because I don't think the media understands. I don't think the average citizen understands, and it's being manipulated, especially on the shutdown side of things. But they do say statistics, there's damn lies, and statistics, and there's a reason for that, but it's because people don't understand them and don't know how to use them. So sorry, supply chains. Let's go.
And a lot of folks go into journalism because they said there'd be no math, right? So they fundamentally kind of don't understand it either. On the supply chain, so let's go back to the year 2000, and the shale revolution is just occurring, and horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing are starting to come together in this perfect way to really change fundamentally the geopolitics of energy. So at that point, we had really lost the fertilizer industry in this country. We had largely lost the steel industry in this country. Plastics were being shipped overseas. There was a lot of industries that are almost iconic to the American, way of thinking and the American dream, that suddenly, because of low-cost energy, low-cost natural gas, had the opportunity to come back from overseas to the United States. So the overnight, over a 5-year period or so, the fertilizer industry just significantly expanded back here in the United States. The steel industry expanded quite a bit with Nucor Steel and others opening steel plants all over the country. You were seeing more and more onshoring of jobs because of the lifeblood of the economy, in our view, and I think you probably agree, begins with a robust energy industry and robust use of natural resources. So if you extend that to what we're learning today and our reliance on nations that often maybe not have our best interests at heart, and you're saying, look at the large number of Americans now that are out of work that aren't in critical supply chain industries, we need to fundamentally ask ourselves as a nation, do we want to continue in that trajectory? Or do we want to take this opportunity with the robust energy industry that we have here at home to create more of these high-paying, sustainable, multi-generational, great sustainable jobs that make things, that create things, that supply things, from PPEs to hand sanitizers to plastic face masks to hospital gowns to hospital equipment, on and on and on. There's thousands of things that we've all identified here during the coronavirus that we were relying on, largely China in this instance, to deliver to us. That should be something that deserves a discussion in Washington and in the state capitals and among heavy industry all over the United States. And we are uniquely positioned, I would argue, because of our oil and natural gas position, to bring those jobs back here at home. And we need to, as a nation, when you're talking about recovery, when you're talking about getting the country back up on its feet again, you have a near-term issue, the immediate needs of getting demand generated again. And then you have the long-term needs of what can we do to make sure that when a pandemic happens again, we are better positioned to withstand it with some jobs that are not as easily expendable, I guess. And we don't see the mass layoffs of 40 million people that we're going to ultimately see in this pandemic.
So is it your impression, based on your membership, that you see the supply chain moving away from China in general? Or do you think they'll be, pressured by market forces, quite frankly, because the reason you go to China is
right. Low cost.
Low cost, yeah.
Right.
And also, to be fair, if you can't get furniture supplied out of Michigan, and Mexico also has been largely shut down, I mean, is it really the length of the supply chain that's the problem, or just the reaction of the governments and the suppliers to it? Because like I said, if you can't get supplies out of Michigan, China's no worse or better in that regard than Michigan. I'm sorry, I'm just using them as a whipping boy here, but you could point to any other states. I mean, maybe you, and this wouldn't be a bad strategy in general, only locate your businesses in red states where if you have a future pandemic, the governor won't go completely nuts. Of course, Michigan was pretty red for a while. So that's, I guess, a wild card option there.
So there's going to be, and so you started the question of who are we hearing this from? So you're hearing this from political leaders a lot in Washington. A lot of our conversations that we're having with folks in Washington are circling around this issue. I think you're going to have a review of this situation at some point, and what states performed well, what states overreacted, what states underreacted. How do the federal government and the various states, how do they interact with each other, and things that we can do better. I think one of those conversations about things that we can do better is how can we create more jobs here at home, because we have low cost energy. So part of the globalization of the supply chain has been the workforce. I got it. Well, the workforce is slowly coming up. It's not to the kind of the American cost structure yet, but we do have abundant supplies of energy and abundant supplies of oil and natural gas that are feedstocks. And we are also producing that oil and gas, natural gas in a more environmentally efficient way than any other place on earth. So the conversation must occur of what do we need to make here at home, how best to go about doing that. And that is going to be led by industry. There's going to be some great business decisions and great opportunities that businesses small and large see and take advantage of. But it will also be a conversation that occurs from a governmental standpoint. And, you know, at the outset, you raised people are going to be scared to get on planes. People are going to be scared to go to hotels, to get on, cruise ships. What will governments do to help alleviate those concerns? What are the business community going to do to help alleviate those concerns? We've got to get to the place where we're doing that, but we're also get to the place where we're making more stuff in the United States. That will be a good outcome from a very bad situation.
And of course, mass transit too. Add that. It's not a big deal here in New Mexico, but in New York City, the subway system was widely known as a vector. And, I can't imagine traffic once you return to quote normal, what New York City traffic might look like if you have significant shrinkage of the subway ridership population. And, that's a scary thought as well. But let's talk about New Mexico. You talk about cheap energy, and that is definitely a benefit here and across the country. But we've been an oil producing state for a very long time in New Mexico, right, but we really haven't seen the kinds of jobs created in our state long term that you have in a state like Texas or other states around the country. New Mexico's just struggled to get beyond the dual prong of federal government and energy production, like raw materials. We don't have energy companies, by and large, not the big ones, located here in New Mexico. We're just a state that, for whatever reason, and I have my suspicions, and we've studied this at the Rio Grande Foundation, but any thoughts on how New Mexico in particular can be more attractive to some of these energy-oriented businesses?
That's a great question. So it's, goes back to one of the things that we're going to have that comes out of the coronavirus is a conversation about other businesses that need to be created and where those businesses need to be created as a result of low cost energy. When you look at the cracker plant in Pennsylvania, and at one point they were talking about multiple cracker plants, and cracker takes natural gas and it turns it into pellets, and which are then used in all plastics, all foam, has thousands of different uses, from cell phones to computers to furniture to stuffing in pillows to paint to everything else. So when you're looking at areas like the Permian that has decades upon decades upon decades of supply of robust natural gas, and you're looking at all the pipeline and infrastructure debates and all these groups that are trying to stop construction of pipelines, it seems to me that conversations around the state incentivizing the construction of things like cracker plants or things like heavy manufacturing that relies on oil and natural gas that's right there in the Permian, those kind of conversations need to start occurring. And the pivot coming out of the coronavirus aftermath, I hope to see leadership at the state level in New Mexico, leadership in the state of Texas, leadership in Washington that encourages those kind of conversations between businesses and government, that whether it's a tax incentive, long-term tax incentive in a situation where every state budget is really constrained, but you also have to look long-term about how we're going to rebuild these economies that allows us to be more sustainable in the future and create these jobs in areas of New Mexico, like Western New Mexico or Gallup or some of the other areas of the state that are some of the poorer areas of the state that are seeing, the youth that once they get to a certain age, they leave because there's nothing there for them. How do we create something that is multi-generational that allows folks to stay closer to home, go off to college, then come back and know that you're going to have a well-paying, long-term job that's going to feed you and your family for generations to come.
So you're saying that the cracker plant, and at first I thought you were going saltines on me. I was wondering where you're going, but in Pennsylvania, that came about as a result of the discoveries in terms of shale production up
Correct.
there in the last
Correct.
decade or so.
So,
Okay.
so Shell Oil is building a very large cracker plant that's actually employing several thousand people by itself, but it will use the Marcellus shale natural gas as a feedstock to make all these products that then go into thousands of other products. So you're seeing in Eastern Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, Northern West Virginia, all that the cracker plant's kind of right there in the nexus. It's in Pennsylvania, but it's very close to Ohio and West Virginia. You're seeing a lot of jobs being created as a result.
Well, of course, those are notably industrialized states going back 100 years. New Mexico, even among Western states, is very lightly industrialized.
Right.
We're really resource driven and government driven. So maybe our geography has something to do with it. And certainly our tax policies could as well. There's a lot of various reasons, but obviously, the discovery of natural gas in Pennsylvania really was a game changer for those folks, because all the businesses manufacturing are already kind of located there, and they could just embrace that whole region once again.
Yep. But also New Mexico, and there's talk about the business hub there in parts of New Mexico, because you're 500 miles from Dallas, Texas, 500 miles from Denver, Colorado. That it could become a great transportation hub, and you could make things there and be a one-day truck trip to some of these other major metropolitan centers. So answering some of those questions for the state, or at least asking some of those questions. And where are the jobs going to come from? What do these jobs mean? How much do they pay? What does it mean from a tax perspective in the state? How do we leverage the great opportunity the state of New Mexico has and in energy to fundamentally grow the state in a positive trajectory going forward?
And I don't know if you studied this or not, but certainly New Mexico as a border state with Mexico.
Correct.
If we do see the supply chain shrink, China sees a loss of American companies moving to perhaps Mexico, especially for that low-cost labor. Do you see that relationship deepening, especially, energy? Mexico's energy producing state, could be an energy exporting state with pipelines coming down from the United States and Mexico. Maybe it's a little bridge beyond where you really are knowledgeable, but do you see that relationship deepening, especially the transportation hub over the border with Mexico?
I think so. Obviously we're our focus more here on the United States, but the USMCA, for example, kind of reset the relationship between Canada and Mexico and the United States. So we're going to see opportunities for more industry coming to the United States that in previous decades had been sent to Mexico because of lower cost labor or lower, just different regimes. But several of those business opportunities, industry, will ultimately come back to the United States. And, based on what I've heard the president say about this, it kind of resets it in a more fair framework for the United States and, border states like New Mexico, Arizona, Texas. I think we'll see a lot of the benefit of that two-way traffic rather than the one-way traffic. Exporting via pipeline oil and natural gas to New Mexico, to Mexico, is another thing we're seeing more and more in discussion. So I think it's creating opportunity for the state and for all the United States.
All right, now let's talk about the environment, and that is a big issue for everyone. Of course, a lot of folks like I have are talking about this moment here that we're all living through as in many ways the environmentalists end goal is to shut down a lot of the economy and save the pollution. I don't know what the final numbers will look like for 2020, but there'll be no doubt that world and U.S. CO2 emissions are going to be down significantly. I don't know what it's like these days in Los Angeles, but the 405 highway, which is normally gridlocked at 6 p.m., you could walk across it pretty easily because there's no one out on the roads. So how do you address those environmental issues, especially with the energy side of things that you represent?
First, let's take a step back, and then I'll answer the COVID question, the coronavirus question at the end. But those that pit the environment versus energy production are not doing themselves or anyone in the United States a service. It is a false choice that says we have to pick either the environment or energy production, meeting basic energy demands. That is a fundamental false choice. We can, and we have shown that we can have both environmental protection, environmental stewardship, and robust energy production. The United States is, as we're seeing in the coronavirus pandemic and its impact on our society, a demand-driven culture. We need energy to sustain our basic way of life. And it's not just transportation and electricity, it's the clothes on our back, it's shampoo, it's aspirin, it's shoes, it's paints, it's carpeting, it's office furniture, it's every single thing you do, touch, or feel on a daily basis is made with and from oil or natural gas. So recognizing that, and recognizing that in the last, pick a number, 30 years, 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, 5 years, 1 year, CO2 emissions are down. Particulate matter is down. Sulfur dioxides are down. Nitrogen oxides are down. Volatile organic compounds are down. Water quality around the United States has improved substantially. So by every single measure, our environment has improved significantly. The envy of the world. The United States is the only nation on earth that is going to be very close to meeting the Paris Accord agreement for CO2 reduction, which was the benchmark in meeting our climate change goals. The United States is going to be about 75 or 80% of the way there by 2025.
That's the one Trump pulled us out of.
No one else is close. So the fact that we continue to have this conversation, if I was a member of the so-called environmental community, and first of all, we're all environmentalists. Everyone wants to pass on to our children a cleaner environment than was passed on to us. That's just human nature. But if I was someone from the Sierra Club or Food and Water Watch or one of these other organizations, I would be pounding my chest right now saying, look what we've done. We've helped the United States improve our environment significantly over the last 30, 20, 15, 10, 1 year. We're doing a great job, and it's our public pressure that has allowed that to happen. But they're not taking a victory lap. They're presenting this false choice that says humans can't choose between oil and natural gas and the environment. We've only got to have one, and if you want to drive your car, you're a terrible person. That's not reality. That's not factual, and it's not supported by every single bit of evidence all of us can read and feel and touch and understand if you just take the time to do it. We're doing both. We're meeting our energy needs. We're supplying affordable and reliable energy, and we're being good environmental stewards. So let's go back to the three: affordable energy, reliable energy, good environmental stewards. We talked about the environment for a second. You hear a lot of folks talking about environmental justice. One of the things we're doing a lot of talking about is energy justice, because folks in New Mexico and other parts of the country must have reliable and affordable energy. You and I should be spending about 6% of our monthly incomes on energy. we can fuel and electricity. We can afford to pay for that. But if you're living at the poverty level, energy is not necessarily an elastic cost. You're paying more of your take home for electricity and fuel. And we're finding that some folks at the poverty level are paying 35 or 40% a month for their energy, whereas everyone should be paying about 5 or 6%. It is not a fair situation to argue you have to choose between the environment and fossil energy. So we're going to ban fossil energy. Therefore, we're going to raise energy prices exponentially overnight. People can't afford that. So if we continue the trajectory of meeting our environmental needs, being good environmental stewards, doing a better job tomorrow than we did today, but delivering affordable, reliable energy while we diversify our energy economy. We're going to use more solar. We're going to use more wind. We're going to be more energy efficient. We're going to conserve more. These are all good things. But the reality is we must have oil and natural gas for the foreseeable future. And we can hold industry to a high standard to do it in an environmentally responsible way. That's a simple equation. And I don't know why anyone would disagree with that.
Well, I certainly agree with you. And that's sort of the fundamental philosophy of the Rio Grande Foundation. Yep. And, we're free market folks, et cetera. But, we're actually coming to close to the conclusion of our discussion here. And I just wanted to get any final thoughts from you in terms of moving forward out of this crisis and just where you see the American economy going, especially vis-a-vis energy. I know we talked a little bit about that at the beginning, but.
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to join you today. And I think we're going to have kind of a near-term return to whatever the new normal is that we described, and it's kind of still in the unknown phase. And then we're going to be looking at longer-term opportunities, and both of these will be occurring over the next 6-8 months. We'll start that longer-term conversation, and if governments around the country, local, state, federal, are sensible about it with conversations with industry leaders, and industry leaders see opportunity, we should take advantage of those, and we should take advantage of the U.S. largesse in oil and natural gas. It really affords us a great opportunity to kind of restart or reset the U.S. economy in a way that, like we talked about, onshores more jobs, creates more long-term opportunity. So we certainly live in interesting times. We hear every day we're all in this together, and we are, and we're going to grow out of it together as well.
All right. Well, how do people find out more about the Consumer Energy Alliance?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's simple. Go to the website, consumerenergyalliance.org. We do a daily blog. We have a lot of information. We're operating in about 22 states right now, discussing, energy, what it means for families and small businesses around the country, and how we can have affordable, reliable energy that meets sensible environmental standards and meets all our needs.
All right. Well, thank you, David. And thanks for tuning in to this edition of Tipping Point, New Mexico. We will see you all next week.